Oh, Arthur? He's just an old friend.
Those were the words my wife used when she looked straight at me and introduced me to the people she'd worked with for almost 3 years. Not her husband, not the man she'd built a life with, just an old friend. I smiled because I didn't know what else to do, but inside, something broke so quietly that nobody in the room noticed. And before that night was over, I'd hear a conversation that would make me question every single year of our marriage. My wife, Lauren, and I had been married for 14 years. We weren't one of those couples who posted romantic photos every weekend or celebrated every tiny anniversary online. We were comfortable. At least that's what I believed. I owned a small home renovation business outside Columbus, Ohio. Nothing flashy, but it paid well enough. Lauren worked in marketing for a fast-growing healthcare software company downtown. She loved her job. She'd started there 3 years earlier after leaving a stressful position with another company, and I'd never seen her happier professionally. She came home excited about projects, talked about coworkers, mentioned office parties, complained about deadlines. Everything sounded completely normal. The only unusual thing was that she almost never wanted me to attend company events. "They're boring," she'd say. "You'd hate talking about marketing all night." Or, "It's really more for employees." I never pushed. Some people like to keep work and home separate. I respected that. Then one Friday afternoon she surprised me. "My company's celebrating a huge contract tonight," she said while getting ready in the bedroom. "Spouses are finally invited. You should come." I remember smiling. "Finally?" She laughed. "It'll be nice." I honestly felt excited. After 14 years together, I still enjoyed showing up somewhere with my wife. She looked beautiful that evening. Simple navy blue dress, hair pinned back. The perfume she'd worn since our honeymoon. For a moment, everything felt like old times. We drove downtown together. The event was being held in a renovated warehouse overlooking the river. There were string lights hanging from steel beams, a jazz trio near the entrance, catered food, and an open bar. It looked expensive, successful. Lauren immediately relaxed the moment we walked inside. She started waving at people. Coworkers came over. Everyone seemed genuinely happy to see her. "This is Jenna. This is Marcus. Oh, you've got to meet Olivia." She introduced me to a few people along the way, always by my first name, never explaining who I was. At first I thought it was simply because everyone already knew. Why wouldn't they? Then we joined a larger group standing near the windows. Someone I'd never met before extended his hand. "You must be Arthur." I smiled. "That's me." He looked at Lauren. "So how do you two know each other?" There was maybe half a second of silence. Just enough time for me to expect the obvious answer. Instead, Lauren smiled effortlessly. "Oh, Arthur's just an old friend." The words landed like a punch to my chest. Old friend, not husband, not even family. Old friend. Nobody reacted. The conversation simply continued. But I stopped hearing it. I remember staring at my wife, waiting for her to laugh, to say she was kidding, to correct herself. She never did. Someone asked me where I lived. Another person started talking about football. Lauren laughed at a joke beside me like nothing unusual had happened. I answered questions automatically. I don't remember what I said. My brain had completely detached from the room. Eventually, Lauren excused herself to speak with one of the executives. I stepped outside onto the balcony. The cold night air hit my face. I kept replaying those 4 words. Just an old friend. There had to be an explanation. Maybe she'd misspoken. Maybe there was some office policy. Maybe I hated how quickly my mind began inventing excuses for someone who hadn't even apologized. About 10 minutes later, a woman walked onto the balcony carrying 2 glasses of wine. She smiled politely. "You okay?" "I think so. I'm Melissa. Arthur." She handed me one of the glasses. "You looked overwhelmed." I laughed awkwardly. "Was it that obvious?" "A little." She hesitated, then asked something strange. "So, how long have you and Lauren known each other?" Again. "Not married, known each other," I answered carefully. "We've been together almost 15 years. Her eyebrows lifted. 15? Yeah. She looked genuinely confused. "I thought she met you after her divorce." I felt every muscle in my body tighten. Melissa blinked. Her expression immediately changed. "Oh." She looked horrified. I probably misunderstood." "No." I kept my voice calm. "What divorce?" She stared toward the ballroom. "I really shouldn't." "What divorce?" She swallowed. "Lauren told everyone she was divorced a few years ago." I didn't speak. Because I couldn't. Melissa looked sick. "I thought, everyone thinks." She stopped herself. "I'm sorry." Then she quietly walked back inside, leaving me standing alone with a glass of untouched wine in my hand. Divorced, according to everyone inside that building. I wasn't Lauren's husband. I was someone she'd known after her marriage ended. I stood there for nearly 5 minutes before forcing myself back inside. Every instinct told me to confront her immediately, demand an explanation, cause a scene if I had to. But another part of me, the calmer part, wanted answers before accusations. If she'd lied about being married, why? And more importantly, what else had she lied about? The rest of the evening became an exercise in pretending. I smiled, nodded, made small talk. Meanwhile, I listened, really listened. Coworkers mentioned Lauren's fresh start. Someone joked about how she'd sworn she'd never marry again. Another colleague teased her about finally dating someone serious. Every single comment confirmed the same impossible reality. The people she spent 40 hours a week with believed my wife had been divorced for years. Not one person knew I existed as her husband. When we finally got into the car that night, Lauren leaned back in her seat and smiled. "That wasn't so bad, was it?" I looked out the windshield. "No." My voice surprised even me. Perfectly calm. "It was interesting." She turned on the radio, started humming along to the music, as if nothing unusual had happened, as if she hadn't erased 14 years of marriage with a single sentence. I drove home in silence. Because I had a feeling the truth was much bigger than one humiliating introduction. And for the first time in my life, I was afraid to find out how much of my marriage had been real. Lauren fell asleep faster than I did that night. She always had that gift. No matter how stressful work became, she'd put her phone on the nightstand, roll onto her side, and be asleep within minutes. I lay there staring at the ceiling, every sentence from the evening replayed in my head. After her divorce, she'd never marry again. Just an old friend. One lie could sometimes be explained. 3 different versions of the same lie couldn't. Around 2 in the morning, I quietly got out of bed. I walked downstairs, made coffee, and opened my laptop. Not because I expected to find some dramatic evidence online. I simply wanted to understand the company she'd been working for all these years. Their website listed executives, department heads, recent promotions, employee spotlight articles. Then I found a section introducing leadership candidates for an upcoming expansion. There was Lauren, professional headshot, short biography. The final sentence caught my attention. Lauren Hayes enjoys traveling, volunteering, and values the independence that comes with building a successful career. No mention of a husband. That wasn't unusual by itself, but the word independence suddenly carried a different weight. I closed the laptop. Maybe I was letting my imagination run wild. Maybe Melissa had misunderstood. Maybe Lauren had simply avoided talking about her personal life. But then why tell people she'd been divorced? Those weren't the same thing. The next morning, Lauren acted exactly as she always did. She made pancakes, asked whether I wanted more coffee, complained about traffic she'd probably face on Monday. She kissed me before going grocery shopping. Nothing in her behavior suggested guilt. That almost disturbed me more. Either she was an incredible liar, or she'd convinced herself that what she'd done wasn't wrong. I decided not to confront her. Not yet. I needed facts. On Monday morning, I drove to one of my renovation jobs. Normally, I listened to sports radio while working. Instead, I kept thinking. Around lunchtime, I called my accountant, Steve. Not because I suspected financial problems, because Steve had handled both our taxes for almost a decade. Arthur, he answered cheerfully. Everything okay? I've got a weird question. Shoot. Have Lauren and I always filed jointly? There was a pause. Of course. So nothing unusual? Not that I can think of. I almost ended the call. Then Steve added something. Actually? What? I remember Lauren asking for copies of some tax documents earlier this year. Copies? Yeah. What kind? I think it was 2 years' worth of returns. Did she say why? No. Did she ask you not to tell me? Steve hesitated. I assumed you already knew. Another tiny piece that didn't fit. When Lauren got home that evening, I casually asked about taxes while we cleaned up after dinner. By the way, I said, Steve mentioned you requested copies of our returns. She didn't even look up from the sink. Yeah. What for? They needed income verification. For what? She shrugged. I don't remember. That answer bothered me immediately. Lauren remembered everything. Birthdays, appointment times, passwords, the expiration date on milk. But she couldn't remember why she'd needed 2 years of tax returns. I nodded anyway. No big deal. She smiled. Exactly. Later that week, another opportunity presented itself. Lauren forgot her tablet at home. She called around noon. Can you bring it to the office? Sure. I'll meet you downstairs. No problem. When I arrived, she was already waiting outside the lobby. She looked oddly nervous. You don't have to come in, she said quickly. I've got meetings. I was just going to hand it to the receptionist. No, it's okay. She took the tablet almost before I'd fully stepped out of the truck. Then she kissed my cheek. You're the best. And hurried back inside. She didn't invite me upstairs, didn't introduce me to anyone, didn't even let me walk through the front doors. I sat there for a moment after she disappeared. Then I noticed something. Through the glass lobby doors, I could see Lauren speaking with a man in a grey suit, tall, confident, maybe early 50s. He smiled. She laughed, not fake laughter. Real laughter, comfortable laughter. He placed a hand lightly on her shoulder as they walked toward the elevators. It wasn't intimate, but it wasn't exactly professional either. I drove away telling myself not to overreact. Still, that image stayed with me. Friday evening, I did something I'd never done before. I searched Lauren's name on social media, not her public profile. I'd seen that countless times. I searched photos where other people had tagged her. Most were harmless. Office celebrations, volunteer events, holiday parties. Then I found an album posted by someone named Olivia, the annual company retreat. Dozens of pictures. Lauren hiking. Lauren at dinner. Lauren sitting beside coworkers. Then one photo stopped me cold. The same man in the grey suit had his arm around her shoulders. Everyone else in the picture stood with polite spacing. Those two didn't. The comments underneath made my stomach turn. You two are adorable. Power couple. Finally got a picture together. Lauren had replied with a smiling emoji. Nothing else. No correction. No explanation. Power couple? I clicked on the man's profile. His name was Daniel Mercer, Vice President of Business Development, married, 2 grown children, publicly active in charity events, respected in the company. My heart started beating faster. Was she having an affair? Everything pointed that direction. Yet something still didn't add up. If that were true, why invent an entire divorce? Why not simply hide her marriage instead of creating a whole fictional past? The next morning I casually mentioned Daniel's name over breakfast. I saw someone from your office online. Oh, Daniel Mercer. She froze, only for a fraction of a second. Then she spread butter across her toast. Yeah, he seems important. He is. You two work together a lot? Sometimes. That was it. No stories. No details. Lauren usually loved talking about work. Now she couldn't end the conversation fast enough. That afternoon, while she visited her sister, I went into our home office looking for warranty paperwork on one of our rental properties. Lauren kept personal documents in a locked filing cabinet. Usually the key hung inside the top drawer. It wasn't there. I checked another drawer. Nothing. Then I noticed something unusual. One folder had been shoved behind a stack of notebooks. Inside were photocopies, tax returns, bank statements, pay stubs. Exactly the kinds of documents Steve had mentioned. Attached to them was something else. A printed application form. The first page was missing, but the remaining pages were enough. Income declarations, asset disclosures, property ownership, and at the bottom, a signature, Lauren's, along with one box that had been checked. Marital status, divorced. I stared at that page for what felt like forever. This wasn't just a lie she'd told coworkers anymore. She had signed legal paperwork claiming she wasn't married. My hands started shaking. Because people don't usually fake a divorce without a reason. And whatever that reason was, I had a feeling it involved far more than my pride. It involved money. Maybe a lot of it. And if my name had been left off those documents, I needed to find out exactly why before it was too late. The moment I saw that checked box divorced, my first instinct was to storm out of the office, call Lauren, and demand an explanation. Instead, I took a picture of every page with my phone. Then I carefully put everything back exactly where I'd found it. If there was one thing I'd learned from running a business, it was this. People tell the truth much more easily when they don't know you already know it. Monday morning, I called Steve again. Can you meet for lunch? His voice immediately turned serious. Everything okay? I honestly don't know. We met at a quiet diner halfway between my job site and his office. I slid my phone across the table. Steve looked at the photos. His expression changed before he'd even reached the second image. Where did you get these? From my house. He looked back at me. Arthur, these aren't ordinary loan papers. What are they? He zoomed in on one page. This looks like documentation for financing or investment approval. So if she's claiming she's divorced, he stopped. What? If these documents were submitted officially, your household assets may have been presented as belonging only to her. I frowned. I don't understand. Depending on what she applied for, leaving out a spouse could affect eligibility. ownership, liability, a lot of things. Illegal? I'm not an attorney. But it could become very complicated. That wasn't exactly comforting. Before we left, Steve gave me one piece of advice. Don't accuse her yet. I wasn't planning to. Good. He folded his hands. If money's involved, get facts before emotions. I nodded. That became my plan. Facts, not assumptions. That evening, Lauren told me she'd be working late. Again. She'd been saying that more often recently. Normally, I never questioned it. This time, I waited. About 20 minutes after she left, I got into my truck. I hated what I was doing. I'd never followed anyone before. It felt wrong. But so did finding out my wife had erased our marriage from her life. She drove downtown, exactly where I expected. But instead of turning toward her office parking garage, she continued another 6 blocks, then pulled into an underground garage beneath a modern office building I'd never noticed before. I parked across the street. For nearly 40 minutes, nothing happened. Finally, Lauren and Daniel Mercer walked out together, not holding hands, not kissing, just talking. They crossed the street to a small Italian restaurant. I waited another 10 minutes before going inside. The hostess asked if I wanted a table. I looked around. There. I pointed toward the back. As luck or bad luck would have it, they were seated only 2 booths away. A tall divider separated us. I couldn't see them clearly, but I could hear enough. The paperwork should be finalized next month, Daniel said. Lauren answered quietly. I know. You've handled everything. Almost. And your husband? A long pause. Then Lauren laughed. He doesn't know anything. My stomach twisted. Daniel lowered his voice. I still don't like keeping him in the dark. We're too close now. Close to what? Another server walked past, drowning out the next few sentences. I leaned slightly closer without making it obvious. Then I heard Lauren again. Once everything closes, it won't matter. Daniel sighed. I just hope he never finds out before then. I couldn't eat, couldn't even pretend. After another 15 minutes, they left separately. I waited until both cars were gone before driving home. Lauren arrived about half an hour later. She looked tired. Long day, she said. I bet. She smiled weakly. I think I'm going to bed early. I watched her disappear upstairs. She'd just admitted, without knowing I was listening, that she was hiding something from me. Now I needed to know what. The next day I hired someone. Not because I wanted to, because I realized I was too emotionally involved. A licensed private investigator named Rachel Dawson came highly recommended by one of my commercial clients. When we met, she listened without interrupting. Then she asked only one question. What do you actually want to know? I thought about it. Everything. She smiled sympathetically. That's usually the answer. I gave her copies of the documents, pictures of Daniel, Lauren's work information, the restaurant, everything. I'll start with public records, she said. If there's something hidden, it usually leaves a paper trail. Those were the longest 5 days of my life. Every morning I woke beside Lauren, pretending nothing had changed. Every evening we ate dinner together. She asked about my projects. I asked about hers. We watched television, laughed at the same sitcom we'd watched for years. Sometimes she'd reach over and squeeze my hand, and every single time, I wondered whether any part of our marriage still existed. Friday afternoon, Rachel called. I think you should come to my office. Her tone told me enough. She'd found something. She spread several folders across the conference table. I don't believe this started as an affair. I blinked. What? She pointed at incorporation documents. About 18 months ago, Daniel Mercer formed a consulting company. So, Lauren owns 49%. I stared at the paperwork. I've never heard of this company. According to these filings, she invested a substantial amount. How much? Rachel looked at another page. Approximately $480,000. I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was impossible. We don't have that kind of money. Rachel met my eyes. Are you sure? My smile disappeared. Our savings. She nodded. I checked property filings too. She slid over another document. One of our rental properties. Only it no longer listed both of us. Lauren had transferred her interest months earlier as part of another financial transaction. I rubbed my forehead. I signed nothing. You didn't? Then how? Rachel handed me one final page. It was a notarized authorization, supposedly signed by me. I looked at my name, looked at the signature. It was close enough that most people wouldn't notice. But I noticed, because it wasn't mine. Someone had forged my signature. Rachel let the silence sit between us. Finally, she said softly, "Arthur, I know." No. She pushed one more folder toward me. I don't think you do. Inside were emails obtained through public litigation records involving another company Daniel had worked with years earlier. Most of them were routine, until the final printed message. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't flirtatious. It was business. Daniel had written, "Once Arthur's assets are fully separated on paper, the investment group won't ask further questions." Lauren's reply was only one sentence. "He trusts me completely." I couldn't breathe. This wasn't just betrayal. It wasn't even primarily about another man. They had used my trust, my marriage, my identity, as part of a financial scheme I knew absolutely nothing about. And suddenly, the words she'd spoken at that company party made perfect sense. She hadn't introduced me as just an old friend because she was embarrassed by me. She'd done it because, in the life she'd built around her coworkers and business partners, her husband wasn't supposed to exist. The drive home from Rachel's office felt unreal. I kept expecting to wake up, to realize I'd fallen asleep in my truck during lunch. That none of it had happened. The forged signature, the hidden company, the emails, the fake divorce. Instead, I pulled into my driveway and saw Lauren's car already parked in the garage. The woman I'd trusted with every major decision in my adult life was inside, probably wondering what to make for dinner. I didn't go in. Not yet. I sat there for almost 20 minutes, staring at the house we'd bought together 12 years earlier. Every room held memories. Painting the nursery we never ended up needing, hosting Thanksgiving for both our families, replacing the roof after a storm, fixing the kitchen cabinets ourselves, because we couldn't afford contractors back then. It suddenly felt like I was looking at someone else's life. My phone buzzed. It was Rachel. I forgot one thing. "What is it?" "I spoke with an attorney before calling you." My stomach tightened. "And he strongly advised you not to confront Lauren until you've spoken with your own lawyer." "Why?" "Because if there are forged documents and undisclosed assets, you need to protect yourself first." I thanked her and hung up. For the first time since this nightmare had begun, I realized something. I wasn't just emotionally vulnerable. I could be financially ruined if I handled this the wrong way. The following Monday, I met with a business attorney named Michael Grant. He spent nearly an hour reading everything Rachel had collected. When he finally leaned back in his chair, he looked more concerned than surprised. "I've seen marriages fall apart over affairs," he said. "I've seen people hide debt. I've even seen forged signatures. But these pieces together," he tapped the stack of papers, "suggest planning, What should I do? For now, he slid a legal pad toward me. Make a list. A list. Every bank account, every investment, every property, every insurance policy, everything with your name attached. He paused. And don't tell your wife you're doing it. Over the next week, I became someone I barely recognized. Every evening I'd smile across the dinner table, ask Lauren how work had gone, listen to stories about meetings and deadlines. Then, after she fell asleep, I'd sit in my home office collecting records, bank statements, mortgage documents, retirement accounts, business files. I wasn't searching for reasons to hate her anymore. I was trying to understand the damage. What I found was almost as painful as the lies themselves. Our joint savings account had been shrinking steadily for nearly 2 years. Not dramatically, just enough to avoid attracting attention. $3,000 here, $5,000 there, $7,000 6 months later. Each transfer had an innocent description: investment, consulting, property expense. Because I trusted Lauren completely, I'd never questioned them. When I totaled everything, just over $490,000 had quietly disappeared, almost exactly the amount Rachel had mentioned. I stared at the calculator. Then I remembered something from nearly 2 years earlier. Lauren had suggested simplifying our finances. You handle the renovation business, she'd said. I'll manage the household accounts. It had sounded reasonable, helpful even. I'd thanked her. Now I realized I'd handed her the keys to everything. A few days later, Michael called. I found something. What? The consulting company. What about it? It isn't doing very well. I frowned. I thought they were building something. They are. He slid another file across his desk when I arrived later that afternoon. They've been trying to attract outside investors. So, they've told those investors Lauren is financially independent. And they've also represented that the capital she invested belongs solely to her. I felt sick. So my money appears to have been presented as hers. Michael didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The document spoke loudly enough. Then he showed me something else. Meeting minutes from one of the company's presentations. Nothing confidential. Just enough had become public during an unrelated dispute. One sentence stood out. Personal obligations have been fully separated from investor assets. Personal obligations. That was me. My marriage had become an obstacle on a business checklist. As I was leaving Michael's office, he asked one final question. Arthur, yeah? If your wife tells you she did this to protect both of you. He paused. Will you believe her? I didn't answer, because I honestly didn't know. That weekend, Lauren suggested we spend Sunday at a lake about an hour away. We haven't had a day together in forever, she said. Part of me wanted to refuse. Instead, I agreed. Maybe I wanted one last chance to see the woman I'd fallen in love with. The day was strangely normal. We rented kayaks, shared lunch by the water, laughed when a duck stole part of my sandwich. For a few hours, I almost convinced myself Rachel had somehow made a mistake. Then, on the drive home, Lauren reached over and took my hand. I've been thinking. About what? We should sell one of the rental houses. I kept my eyes on the road. Why? It would free up cash. For what? She hesitated. Just opportunities. What opportunities? You know, I actually don't. She looked out the window. Business. There it was again. That vague answer. No details, no numbers, just another request for trust. Only this time, she no longer had it. I couldn't sleep. Around 1 in the morning, I walked downstairs for a glass of water. As I passed Lauren's office, I noticed light coming from under the door. She'd forgotten to close her laptop. The screen was still awake. I knew I shouldn't look. I really did. But after everything I'd learned, I couldn't walk away. An email window was open. Drafts. No recipient yet. The subject line read, Transition Plan. I scrolled only far enough to read the beginning. Once the final transfer is complete, I'll tell Arthur the marriage has run its course. He'll never connect it to the investment timeline. I stopped reading, not because there wasn't more. Because there didn't need to be. My wife wasn't only planning to leave me. She had already planned when to leave me. And that timing depended not on our relationship, but on finishing whatever financial arrangement she and Daniel had built. For the first time in 14 years, I looked at the woman sleeping upstairs and realized I didn't know her at all. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the living room until sunrise, staring at the dark television screen with Lauren's unfinished email burned into my memory. Once the final transfer is complete. Once. She'd already decided. The marriage wasn't ending because we'd grown apart. It was ending because she'd reached the final stage of a plan. By Monday morning, I had made my decision. I wasn't going to confront her at home, not while emotions were running high. Not without every piece of evidence protected. Michael arranged for all of my documents to be copied and stored securely. He also recommended opening a separate bank account for my business income and temporarily freezing any transactions that required both of our signatures until everything could be reviewed. You're not trying to punish her, he reminded me. You're trying to prevent further damage. Late Wednesday afternoon, Rachel called again. We've confirmed one more thing. What is it? The investment group. What about them? They aren't aware you're married. I closed my eyes. They think Lauren is single. Yes. And they believe the money came entirely from her. So everyone has been lied to. Looks that way. That mattered. It meant this wasn't just a private betrayal. Other people had made business decisions based on false information. Michael suggested we arrange a meeting before anyone had the chance to move more money. By Friday morning, we were sitting in a conference room downtown. Present were Michael, Rachel, one representative from the investment group, Daniel Mercer, and Lauren. When she walked in and saw me sitting there, she stopped cold. Her smile disappeared. Arthur. She looked around the room. What's going on? Michael stood. Please have a seat. She didn't. She kept looking at me. What is this? I answered quietly. I know. She frowned. Know what? I looked directly into her eyes. That I'm apparently your old friend. Every bit of color left her face. Daniel shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Lauren slowly sat down. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then Michael placed a folder in front of her. Inside were copies of the forged authorization, the investment paperwork, the emails, the bank transfers, and finally, a printed copy of the draft she'd left open on her laptop. She flipped through the pages faster and faster, then stopped. Her shoulders dropped. I can explain. I almost laughed. Those were the words I'd imagined hearing for weeks. But now, I wasn't interested in explanations. The representative from the investment group spoke first. Mrs. Hayes, are these documents authentic? Lauren looked at Daniel. He avoided her eyes. She looked back at the table. Yes. The room became very quiet. Michael asked the next question. Have you represented yourself as divorced during these business dealings? Another long silence. Yes. And were you legally married during that entire period? Lauren whispered, yes. Daniel finally spoke. It wasn't supposed to become this. I turned toward him. You forged my life into a business strategy. He shook his head. No, the signatures weren't my idea. I looked at Lauren. She began crying. Not dramatically, not loudly, just silent tears. I never wanted to hurt you. Those words hit me harder than I expected, 'cause I believed she meant them. In her own mind, she probably hadn't. She'd convinced herself that everything would work out, that she'd tell me later, that the investment would succeed, that we'd both be rich, that somehow the lies wouldn't matter. People can justify almost anything when they believe the ending will erase the damage. It doesn't. The investment representative closed his folder. Our legal department will handle the rest. He stood. So will ours, Michael replied. Within minutes, everyone except Lauren and me had left the room. For the first time since this nightmare began, we were alone. She looked exhausted. I was going to tell you. When? She couldn't answer. When the investment paid off. Silence. When I signed papers I didn't know about. Silence. When your coworkers stopped believing you were divorced. More silence. Finally she whispered. It started so small. I waited. When Daniel asked if I'd consider investing, I said no. But then he said married investors complicated everything. So you lied. She nodded. I thought it would only be temporary, and the forged signature. She covered her face. I was terrified you'd say no. I would have. I know. That single sentence said everything. She knew I would never have agreed, so she removed my ability to choose. I stood up. I loved you, Lauren. Fresh tears rolled down her cheeks. I know. No. No. I shook my head. I don't think you do. If you had, I paused, trying to keep my voice steady. You would have trusted me with the truth instead of protecting a lie. She reached toward me. I stepped back. Not out of anger, because I knew that if I let her hold my hand one last time, I might start remembering the woman she used to be instead of the one sitting in front of me. I never stopped loving you, she whispered. I believed that too. Love wasn't the problem anymore. Trust was. And trust, once broken this completely, doesn't come back because someone finally admits what they've done. It comes back through honesty. She'd chosen deception instead. I hope someday you find peace, I said quietly, but it won't be with me. Then I walked out of the room. For the first time in weeks, I felt something other than anger. I felt clarity. The divorce wasn't quick. Real life rarely is. There were months of meetings with attorneys, accountants, and investigators. Every document had to be reviewed. Every transfer had to be traced. Every signature had to be examined. Some of the money was recovered. Some wasn't. The consulting company fell apart almost immediately after the truth came out. Once the investors learned that key financial disclosures had been based on false information, they suspended funding and launched their own internal review. Daniel resigned before the process was over. I never celebrated that. Watching someone else's career collapse didn't undo what had happened to mine or to my marriage. Lauren eventually admitted to everything during the legal proceedings, not because she suddenly wanted to, because the evidence left no room to deny it. The judge wasn't interested in excuses. Neither were the financial investigators. One afternoon, months later, Lauren asked if we could meet one last time, not through our lawyers, just the two of us. I almost declined, but after 14 years together, I felt we deserved one final conversation. We met at the same little coffee shop where we'd had our first date. It looked almost exactly the same brick walls, same old wooden tables, Even the owner recognized us. He smiled as he walked by. Good to see you both again. Neither of us corrected him. Lauren looked different. Not physically. She just seemed tired. The confidence she'd always carried was gone. She wrapped both hands around a cup of coffee she barely touched. I've replayed everything 1,000 times, she said quietly. I nodded but didn't interrupt. I kept telling myself I was fixing our future. She gave a small, bitter laugh. I never admitted I was destroying our present. For the first time since all of this had started, she wasn't trying to justify herself. She wasn't blaming Daniel. She wasn't blaming work. She wasn't blaming pressure. She was simply telling the truth. I should have told you the day he made the offer, she continued. You would have probably laughed and said it sounded risky. I would have. She smiled faintly. I know. Another long silence settled between us. Finally, she looked at me. Do you hate me? I thought about that question much longer than she probably expected. No. She looked surprised. I don't. I was angry. I was hurt. I was embarrassed. I took a slow breath. But hate takes too much energy. She lowered her eyes. I don't think I'll ever forgive myself. That's something you'll have to work through. She nodded. I know. Before we left, she reached into her purse and slid a small envelope across the table. I found these while packing. Inside were old photographs. Our honeymoon. Camping in the Smoky Mountains. The day we bought our first house. Pictures of us painting walls with more enthusiasm than skill. I smiled despite myself. We were happy. We were, she whispered. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then I placed the photos back in the envelope. I'm going to keep these. I'm glad. As we stood to leave, Lauren hesitated. I'm sorry, Arthur. Not the polished apology I'd imagined during countless sleepless nights. Just 4 simple words. This time they felt real. I know, I replied. And for the first time, I actually believed she meant them. We walked out in different directions. Neither of us looked back. That was almost 3 years ago. My renovation business survived, though rebuilding it took time. I became far more careful with contracts, paperwork, and finances, not because I expected everyone to betray me, but because trust and verification can exist together. They're not opposites, they're partners. I also learned something much harder. The biggest lies don't always begin with bad intentions. Sometimes they begin with one compromise, one shortcut, one sentence like, "It's only temporary," then another, and another, until the person telling the lie can't remember where the truth ended. People occasionally ask me what hurt the most. Was it the fake divorce, the forged signature, the hidden money, the possibility that she cared more about a business deal than our marriage? The answer always surprises them. The most painful moment wasn't finding the documents. It wasn't reading the emails. It wasn't even sitting across from Lauren during the final meeting. It was standing at that company event, smiling politely, while the woman I loved looked at me and said, "I'd like you to meet an old friend," because in that single moment, she wasn't just lying to her coworkers. She was quietly telling me that the life we'd built together had already been replaced by another version of reality, one where I no longer had a place. If there's one thing this experience taught me, it's this. Trust isn't destroyed by one massive betrayal. It's usually worn away by small lies that are left unchallenged, because love makes us want to believe the best in people. Love is important, but love without honesty eventually becomes something else. And if someone asks you to trust them while hiding the truth, they're not asking for trust. They're asking for permission to deceive you. I refused to give that permission ever again, and strangely enough, that decision didn't make me bitter. It made me free.